delightful, Robert Wolf. I hope you have the time of your life on the couch today.
Thanks for
great.
taking the hits.
It was great.
You did well.
You know, you're a smart man.
As your mom said, spicy's a good word for today.
Spicy's good.
He said to me yesterday, be nice.
For Friday.
I wasn't his biggest problem.
We are back right here on the couch
And
Monday,
you guys
noon
were to
Eastern.
the left
Here's
of
Harris.
me. I thought it was going to be easier.
We begin with a Fox News alert. A gunman has gone on a deadly rampage in New Zealand, killing at least 49 people, wounding dozens more inside 2 mosques. I'm Harris Faulkner, continuing coverage now on Outnumbered Overtime. Police have taken 3 people into custody and charged 1 man with murder as we learn more disturbing details about the terror attacks. The shooter broadcasted a live, horrific stream as he opened fire on worshipers during their Friday morning prayers. One witness describes his desperate efforts to get away from the gunman.
And then everybody just run toward the back doors just to save themselves. And first we hide behind the cars and, under the cars. And then when we see that firing is still on, we try to, jump the fence.
Greg Palcott reporting in London. Greg?
We are watching, like everyone, Harris, this horrendous act of terror in a usually very peaceful corner of the world. As you noted, 2 mosques in the city of Christchurch, New Zealand, was the scene of the carnage. 1 gunman is under arrest. He is charged with murder. 2 armed suspects are being held, along with the 49 killed, at least 48 people injured, some in critical condition. The ugly shooting shattering the holiest and busiest time of the week at these mosques. Here is how another eyewitness described it.
I was hearing that shooting after shooting after shooting. It went on about 6 minutes or more, and I could hear screaming and crying, and I saw some people were, drop dead.
Incredible stuff. The shooting, as noted, was broadcast by the gunman live on social media. We are not showing that out of respect, but we have seen it. It is nothing short of a real-life, disgusting video game. Also posted by a man identifying himself as a 28-year-old white nationalist, a 74-page manifesto in which he denounces immigrants and Muslims, calling them invaders. Here is what New Zealand's Prime Minister had to say.
This is one of New Zealand's darkest days. Clearly, what has happened here is an extraordinary and unprecedented act of violence.
President Trump also mentioned in that manifesto, tweeted out his condolences. He expressed his warmest sympathy and best wishes to the people of New Zealand after what he described as a horrible massacre. Harris.
Greg Palcott, thank you very much. I want to bring in my first guest, Robin Simcox, a terror and national security analyst for the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center. Robin, thank you for being with me. First of all, as they take a look at the scene, what specifically are they seeking?
Well, I think at this stage there's going to be a lot of interest to see whether this gunman had any associates. Obviously, there have been people arrested alongside him. We don't know exactly what their involvement in this plot is, if any. But this guy left behind a very large social media and online presence as well. So there's going to be a lot of work being done by investigators, not only looking at his contacts, his physical contacts in the real world, but also the kind of people he was interacting with online.
And talk to me about the kind of terror that this is. You know, that the country, and ours is this way too, you wait until you have certain criteria in place and then you call it terror.
Yeah, well, I think it's very clear immediately this is an act of terrorism. If you look at the gunman's manifesto, he lays out very clearly his political motivations, his political agenda. He has a hatred of Muslims. He calls them invaders. He views this attack as being essentially a defense of the white race, the defense of white supremacy. And so there's very little doubt that this is a horrendous act of terrorism, the worst certainly to hit New Zealand, and something that is unfortunately happening increasingly throughout the world.
One of the jarring parts of all of this bloodthirsty killing is the fact that it was streaming live. And the social media, I guess you call it social media, at least the internet component of all of this is as much of the story as anything else.
Absolutely right. The internet is absolutely vital to this. Just from what we've seen already. He posted pictures of the murder weapons on Twitter in the days before. He obviously live streamed his attack on Facebook, but he was also using messaging boards that he was very active on to encourage the people he was talking to online to follow the attack as it took place. The social media, this kind of twisted internet culture, which he seems to be part of, seems to me to be a very integral part as to what motivated and the kind of ideology that seemed to help create this twisted view, this twisted worldview the gunman had, where he thought he needed to carry out these awful killings.
Yeah, and you know, I broadened it out from social media to internet because I have on my list of 4chan, 8chan. Those were platforms that I was less familiar with. I mean, is that where you find terrorists? Is that where you find... I don't know anything about these platforms. What can you tell us?
Well, not always. I mean, it enables people to post anonymously, essentially. They're kind of like image boards. And he had been posting on those platforms quite a bit. But it's also, it's a sort of strange part of internet culture. And you look at the manifesto that the gunman put out, and it contains memes, it contains kind of obscure reference to various parts of the internet culture, which I think we're generally... not many of us are that familiar with. Certainly, it's not the kind of standard white supremacist playbook that we've seen in past attacks. But it seems to me to be something that law enforcement and politicians and officials are going to have to be increasingly aware of and increasingly familiar with.
Well, and I know Facebook has released exclusively to us at Fox News some notes on its community standards. And so these social media platforms are certainly addressing some of the issues. And I'm certain federal authorities and international authorities will want to ask them. Before I go on with anything like that, though, we know that we have reports there in New Zealand of them looking out for other sites. I don't know if that's precautionary within that country. That's what we're doing here. But talk to me about what they would be looking for inside that country that got hit today.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely will be precautionary. We often see terror levels raised in the immediate aftermath of very serious attacks, and New Zealand has raised its previously low terrorist alert to a higher one. I think it's an abundance of caution. Obviously, after an event like this, you're always concerned, especially with the way that the attack was broadcast. You're concerned, very much concerned, about copycat attacks, people that are inspired by this sick attack to carry out something similar. Understandably, New Zealand's authorities are very concerned about that potential. It's why not only do we need to have an awareness of what exactly is going on in the internet with this kind of ideology, but also intelligence sharing and law enforcement and intelligence agencies level between New Zealand and its allies, which is fortunately very good, and that cooperation should obviously continue.
All right. Robin Simcox, with your expertise today, we are appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you.
This Fox News alert, as the story is breaking as well, administration officials are telling Fox News President Trump will issue a veto of a resolution blocking his national emergency declaration today, this afternoon, in the Oval Office. Want to bring in now Hogan Gidley in the White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary position. Great to see you today, Hogan. First of all, I want to start with this declaration veto today, later today. The president now making it official.
Absolutely. Today we expect the president to veto this resolution at 3:30 in the Oval Office, and it is a sad moment and a very important moment, not just because it's the first veto this president has issued, but it's a sad moment and an important moment because of what it actually represents, and that is a lack of understanding and belief on the part of Democrats in Congress to recognize the serious, severe crisis we face along our southern border, and to recognize the emergency that exists in this country with so many people dying every year, people pouring into this country illegally, the drugs that are now in this country that are killing American citizens. These deaths are needless, they are senseless, and they are 100% preventable. This president has the power to do this, and that authority was granted by Congress, and all he's doing is enforcing the laws written and passed by Congress. At its core, Congress doesn't like the fact that this president is trying to stand up and protect the American people. That vote against the president was also against the American people and against their safety and security, and the president will veto that resolution today in the Oval Office.
So that's your word to Democrats. There were 12 Republicans who joined those Democrats yesterday, which was a number almost double what we had learned beginning of this week. And earlier this week, the president warned Republicans about voting against his national emergency declaration. Let's watch that.
I told Republican senators, vote any way you want. Vote how you feel good. But I think it's bad for a Republican senator. I also think it's bad for a Democrat senator to vote against border security and to vote against the wall. I think if they vote that way, it's a very bad thing for them long into the future.
Why is it a bad thing for Republicans to vote against the president's decision to say that this is a national emergency?
Well, look, it's far from me to try and guess why Republicans would do this. Some mentioned the procedural line they didn't like. Some questioned it on other grounds. But the fact is, it's bad because that vote against that measure effectively made this country less safe. It put American people, the American people's lives at risk. It is dangerous. And what we have seen in the exploding numbers of people coming into this country illegally, unchecked, using children, the most vulnerable among us to make that journey, using women, the abuse, the rape that occurs along this journey as they move into this country. There are so many incentives in our laws to use and abuse so many people across the globe to come here. Democrats wouldn't even come to the table to have that conversation. Republicans will have to answer for that as well. But the fact remains, the emergency, it does exist. The crisis in this country is now well recognized. Barack Obama called it a humanitarian crisis back in 2014.
Right.
And today in the Oval Office, I just want to make this point as well, Harris, the president will have angel moms and dads with him in the Oval Office, people who have been so terrified and upset and their lives turned upside down by illegal immigrants who've killed their children. There will also be law enforcement officials, Customs Border Protection will be there as well to explain exactly what's going on and what that vote meant for the people of this country. And it's a sad situation.
And again, that's 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And I want to get to this. The president obviously meeting with national security officials. That's happened in just the last hour or so at the Pentagon. And Hogan, North Korea is reportedly threatening to suspend negotiations with the United States. And it could resume testing as President Trump went to the Pentagon today. So that's something that they had promised they would do. You didn't get a communique, though, out of that second summit. And do you feel like that now is beginning to rear an ugly head?
I wouldn't say that. Look, the president has a good relationship with Chairman Kim. He also said that if Chairman Kim started to do the things he said he wouldn't do, that it would be quite disappointing. The president
do we have a reaction or just disappointing?
Well, look, it's disappointing if those reports are true. I'm not going to comment on intelligence, of course, but the fact remains the president wants denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. That's what this is all about. And any step backwards would be a disappointment. The president said that many times.
Okay. And the reason I say, is there any other reaction to that? I mean, when other countries have done things, we sometimes have, you know, had some sort of a plan that you announced to the American people. This is a big deal if they resume that missile testing that they had stopped for 18 months.
Absolutely, and that was one of the things they promised they wouldn't do while these negotiations went on. Obviously, I don't have the announcement here for your program.
Sure.
But we're absolutely on top of this, looking at it. The president was clear-eyed going into this, understanding the reputation and the historical context of the regime. We know that's exactly why the president walked away from a deal that wasn't good for this country. He wants to protect the American people, our partners and allies across the globe, and it makes the world safer for North Korea to be denuclearized and not to continue on with testing. And we're monitoring the situation, as you know.
And by the way, Hogan, I don't know if people missed this or got it yesterday, but some Democrats are continuing to give the president credit for walking away from what would have been a bad deal rather than sticking to one that would not have been good for the country. Among them was Chuck Schumer, Senator Schumer, just yesterday. Hogan Gidley, outside the White House today. Thank you and have a great weekend.
Thanks so much for the time.
New information now on the Boeing 737 MAX 8 plane that crashed on Sunday in Ethiopia. 157 people on board died, and leading to the worldwide grounding now of that particular kind of plane. Ethiopian Airlines is saying the investigation has begun in Paris into the plane's flight data and voice recorders. But we're also learning the crash site was not secured, which could compromise the investigation. Griff Jenkins looking at that from Washington. Griff?
Hey, Harris, we're learning about potentially very troubling parallels between this crash of the Ethiopian Flight 302 and one that happened 5 months ago on a similar Boeing 737 MAX 8. And that parallel is that in both cases, the pilot requested to return to the airport minutes into the flight. According to the New York Times, now, the authorities have been looking at the black boxes. We don't know exactly what they found, but the New York Times is reporting today that a person who retrieved air traffic communications says that minutes into the flight, the captain requested permission to return to the airport in a panicky voice shortly after takeoff, saying to the controllers, quote, break, request back home, request vector for landing. The Times also reporting that controllers observed the plane drastically dipping up and down. And as we all know now, just minutes into that flight, it crashed, killing all 157 aboard. Ethiopian Airlines posting to Twitter that their chief accident investigator is there, along with teams from our NTSB and the FAA. They've been looking at it all day in Paris. We haven't gotten any word on what they found or anything more about the crash site being secure or unsecure. Now, here at the airport, by the way, at Reagan National Airport, impacts have been minimal, but there have been some delays, some cancellations. Some of the airlines most impacted, like Southwest and American Airlines, emailing their customers, trying to allay concerns. Southwest's President or CEO Gary Kelly issuing this statement about those planes, saying our experience with the MAX, along with other U.S. operators, has been phenomenal. We've operated over 40,000 flights, covering almost 90,000 hours. But the fact remains, whether you're a passenger worldwide, having two crashes so similar just 5 months apart is troubling. And Boeing, which oddly enough, I just looked recently and didn't look like the stock has taken an impact, but concerns because this is one of the flagships for the airline. Harris?
All right, Griff, thank you very much. It is deadline day. Democratic chairman of three most powerful committees demanding more information about communications between President Trump and Russia's Vladimir Putin. So, will the White House comply? We'll talk about it next. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is voicing her support for lowering the federal voting age to 16. Pelosi is arguing the change would be a boost for voter engagement and drive interest in politics among young people who are learning about it in high school. House lawmakers last week voted down an amendment to the Democrats' voting rights bill that would have lowered the voting age at that point. Today is the deadline that three House Democrats have set for the White House and State Department to turn over information on communications between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. They specifically want to know what happened during the 2 hours the pair spent alone with only their interpreters at a meeting in Helsinki last year. At the end of the sit-down, President Trump said he did not think Russia had interfered in the 2016 election. I want to bring in Congressman Will Hurd of the House Intelligence Committee. The chairman of that committee is among the group demanding this information. Congressman Hurd, thank you for being on the program today. First of all, what information specifically are you looking for? I mean, do you have any indication whether this conversation was a friendly conversation, if it was filled with information? What are you looking for?
Well, you'd have to ask the three chairmen that did that. They didn't consult with me on what kind of information they're looking for on this, on whatever this probe is. In my opinion, we should be letting the Mueller investigation play out, and let's hear what happens with Mueller. I think you're going to see my friends on the Democratic side of the aisle try to continue further investigations, continue to use more taxpayer dollars to continue this assault and trying to understand what may or may not happen.
So do you see this as part of the Mueller investigation? Is that why you bring it up with this look at what those communications were between Trump and Putin?
Well, I think everybody is starting to conflate all these issues. The entity that was tasked to decide what happened in our elections, were any Americans complicit in working with the Russians, was the Mueller investigation. So let's let that complete. It was 2 years, millions of dollars were spent. Let's make sure all that information is made public, not just the assessment of one individual, but I want to see the transcripts. I want to see the interviews. I want to make sure there's full transparency so that it doesn't, that will prevent a future innuendo or conspiracy theories about what may or may not happen during the investigation.
All right, and since today is that deadline, I just want to toggle back, if we can, to the sit down between our president and the president of Russia. Do you think that it's appropriate for the American public to know what was said in that private meeting? How does that maybe compared with how we treat other presidents who have private meetings?
I don't think that private meetings between presidents have ever been revealed. I think it's only been in very rare cases. I think oftentimes that there's an assessment of the topics that had happened in those meetings, especially between two heads of state, in order for the State Department and the intelligence community, in order to follow up on a lot of the activity. Usually the national security staff has access to that. I do not know what we already know about those things, and so again, the chairman of those committees did not consult me on that request for information.
Now that's an interesting point, because there may be information that is known that we're just not privy to. I'll give you the last word.
Well, look, this is, for me, what we should be focusing on. Let Mueller continue, see how that happens. Let's make sure we're looking at real threats to our country. That's China. We know what China is trying to do by dominating major industries and major economies of the future. We should be having hearings on this. We should be making sure we're having hearings on how can the United States stay competitive in 5G, because our future economy is going to be based off on that. I hope we can get back to monitoring these important intelligence issues as we go forward in the future.
That is an incredible list of things that matter. Representative Will Hurd out of Texas, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The fallout continues for actress Lori Loughlin and her family after her arrest this week for her alleged ties to a college admissions scandal. The Hallmark Channel has cut ties with Loughlin. Beauty retailer Sephora and hair care company Tresemme have parted ways with her daughter, who is a social media influencer. Prosecutors allege Loughlin and her husband paid $500,000 to help their daughters get into USC. There are now reports the two daughters are leaving that university. Former FBI agent Peter Strzok has revealed that the DOJ reached an agreement with the Hillary Clinton lawyers to block the FBI's access to Clinton Foundation emails. That's according to newly released testimony. Catherine Herridge with details ahead. Young people around the world are walking out of their classrooms today in a global climate strike. Students from schools in more than 100 countries are participating in the protest and demanding action on climate change. This global movement started last August in Sweden when one teenager began skipping school on Friday to hold a solo protest outside Parliament. A bombshell in newly released transcripts of former FBI agent Peter Strzok's testimony. Strzok has told Congress last year that Hillary Clinton's team and the Obama DOJ struck a deal that blocked FBI access to Clinton's foundation emails on her private server. This follows the release of former FBI lawyer Lisa Page's testimony, which claimed the Obama DOJ rejected the possibility of charging Clinton with gross negligence. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live for us in Washington. Catherine?
Thanks, Harrison. Good afternoon. According to the transcript, Strzok was pressed on the FBI's access to Hillary Clinton's personal servers used for State Department business. Under questioning from Judiciary Committee's general counsel, Strzok acknowledged that Clinton's unsecured personal servers contained a mixture of emails related to the Clinton Foundation and other matters. Question: were you given access to Clinton Foundation-related emails as part of the investigation? Strzok: we were not. We did not have access. My recollection is that the access to those emails were based on consent, and that was negotiated between the Department of Justice attorneys and counsel for Clinton. Strzok also testified that an FBI filter team was set up to work through the various terms of the various consent agreements. Limitations imposed on the searches included date ranges as well as names. Strzok told investigators the agreement was reached with Clinton's attorneys because he said FBI lawyers believe they lack probable cause to get a search warrant for the servers. Harris.
Well, this next part, if we'll learn more, a Florida court, I understand, is about to unseal records in the defamation suit against media outlet BuzzFeed.
Well, that's right. Newly released depositions from a defamation suit in Florida show that David Kramer, an aide to Senator John McCain, gave the unverified Trump dossier to BuzzFeed, as well as a dozen reporters here in Washington during the presidential transition. Kramer told the court he was singled out by its author, former British spy Christopher Steele, to lend credibility to the Democrat-funded opposition research. The project was run by Glenn Simpson's Fusion GPS. Quote, I think they felt a senior Republican was better to be the recipient of this rather than a Democrat. Because if it were a Democrat, he testified, I think that the view was that it would have been dismissed as a political attack. The former head of the FBI's counterintelligence unit, Bill Priestap, gave this declaration to the court that confirms the FBI got the first 33 pages of the dossier from Senator McCain in December 2016, and that President Obama was briefed by senior intelligence officials, including then DNI James Clapper, on the dossier about 10 days before the inauguration. Harris.
Catherine Herridge, thank you very much.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it. Fox News alert, as North Korea now is reportedly considering suspending nuclear talks with the United States and could resume missile testing if Washington does not make some concessions, they say. The White House is pushing back on those reports. Here's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo earlier today.
With respect to what was said last night about Chairman Kim potentially considering ending the moratorium, I can say only this. In Hanoi, on multiple occasions, he spoke directly to the president and made a commitment that he would not resume nuclear testing, nor would he resume missile testing. So that's Chairman Kim's word. We have every expectation that he will live up to that commitment.
I want to bring in now Fox News senior strategic analyst General Jack Keane. General, great to have you on the program today.
Good to be here.
First of all, I want to start with whether or not, and I asked this of the Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley earlier this hour, how much did it hurt the process not to get some sort of written agreement, a communique from North Korea out of that second summit on a cease and those missile testing and more?
Well, it wasn't possible, and here's why. You know, the Kim leadership really miscalculated going into the Hanoi summit. They essentially put the same deal on the table, Harris, that they had done with previous administrations. Close a nuclear facility, promise to give up nuclear weapons, in return, get sanction relief now. That has always worked. I'm stunned that they thought that this administration, with Trump's leadership and the strong team around him, and given all the meetings prior to this, that they thought they would get that deal out of this administration. It didn't work. So what are they doing now? They're trying to get leverage back. It's face-saving, particularly with their leaders at home. So they're saying, we may not return to the negotiations. We may restart missile testing and nuclear testing. They will return to negotiations. Why? Because it's in their national interest. They will not conduct missile and nuclear testing because they are very uncertain as to what the reaction of the Trump administration would be to that act. Would we go right back to crisis mode? Would the military option get back on the table? Yes to all of that.
Wow.
So I think this is about leverage, Harris, and they want the administration to come forward. And the administration will come forward because it's in our national interest to negotiate. But we are not going to give them the one leverage we have over them. The only reason why there's been 2 summits, and that is because of the sanctions themselves. We're not going to give in on that until there's substantive relief from nuclear weapons and missiles.
Spoken like a general. They will come back to the table, you said. It sounds like Kim Jong-un was maybe giving himself a little bit more credit of a charm offensive possibility than what was really there. Maybe he thought he could change things from what you're saying. You know, part of the narrative, though, that it seems coming out of North Korea right now is to make our side seem hostile and untrustworthy. I want to go to now what John Bolton's claims were today and how he's debunking that. Watch.
Well, I think that's inaccurate, but the president is our decision maker. I've seen the statement you're referring to just in the past hour. I've spoken to my South Korean counterpart. We've discussed their reaction and our reaction, but I'd like to speak further within the U.S. government before we respond.
Yeah, so what John Bolton there is talking about is Secretary Pompeo being called hostile and untrustworthy by the North Koreans and being blamed for the talks breaking down.
Yeah, well, certainly they're not going to accept any responsibility themselves, and they do not want to point at the president. Believe me, the president is a decision maker here. Anybody that's been around the president discussing foreign policy and national security knows full well it's his foreign policy and it's his national security that's driving it. And listen, you made a very astute comment. I do believe that one of the reasons why they put that deal on the table as well is the relationship that Kim believes he established with our president. I know someone who has seen those letters that he wrote to them, and they are warm, and there's a degree of affection in those letters coming from Kim to the president. So he actually misread that, I believe, as well, thinking that personal relationship would, in a sense, guarantee what he was putting on the table is in terms of the president giving into it. And they're also trying to separate the Trump team from the president, and that's not going to work. This is the president's negotiations. The good news is he's got excellent advisors around him, in my judgment.
So what happens next? I mean, you said they'll come back to the table. We'll at least talk with them. Sanctions won't go away. They won't get what they want in regard to that. But we've gone 18, 19 months without missile testing. And if that resumes, what should our response be?
Well, we will double down on sanctions, to be sure. I think we should do something about the sanctions right now, because Russia and China are not in compliance with the very UN resolution that they voted for. They're both providing assistance to North Korea in violation of those sanctions. We should fix that and look for other opportunities to hurt the North Koreans, particularly through Chinese banks. And I believe we should increase our military capability in the region to demonstrate to them that the military option has not gone away. This is only if we return to a crisis mode. I don't think that is going to happen. It's not in North Korea's interest to do that. And I don't believe we're going to make any concessions dealing with sanctions either.
General Keane, thank you very much. Good to see you today.
Yeah, good talking to you, Harris.
Snowy weather, leaving a family trapped inside their car for 12 hours. How they finally were rescued by strangers. A scary story with a happy ending. A family of 4 is reported to be doing okay after this happened, trapped inside their snowbound car for 12 hours. In a rural part of Colorado, southeast of Denver, the family was able to make contact with firefighters, who then couldn't get them out after several unsuccessful attempts. Eventually, some strangers arrived to help after learning about the family's plight online. 2 people who live in the area used a tractor to clear the roadway. Here's the dad who had been trapped in the car.
Described the elation when we saw those headlights come over the hill. It was a huge, huge moment for all of us in the car.
The 2 families later had dinner together. There it is, a big selfie, celebrating their newfound friendship. New details now on a suspected mob hit, the first in New York City in 30 years. Police now say they believe the murder of reputed Gambino family head may have been a setup. Rick Leventhal has the story. Rick?
And Harris, this was a rare execution of a reputed mafia boss with direct connections to the last time this happened in New York more than 30 years ago. And it's hard not to see similarities between this case and the Godfather trilogy. The murder happened Wednesday night in Staten Island, New York, which is where much of the original film was based. The Daily Beast is reporting that the victim, Gambino boss Frank Cali, was lured from his home by the hitman who backed a truck into Cali's Cadillac. The gunman hands Cali his license plate, which had fallen off, and when Cali turns to put it back on his car, that's when the gunman fires a dozen shots, hitting Cali at least 6 times, according to the Beast. That hit was captured on surveillance video, which may be a first. Cali's family reportedly refused to turn over that security footage to the NYPD, so the cops had to come back with a search warrant to get the video.
I won't get too deep into it, but whether it was an altercation or a conversation, that remains to be seen. But he has a conversation with an individual in front of that residence, and that individual at some point in time, it's only about a minute into it, pulls out a firearm and shots are fired.
The victim reportedly had close ties to Sicily, and this could be a power struggle to bring control of their illicit business back to the States. Cali is the first alleged organized crime boss to be killed in New York since Paul Castellano was gunned down outside the Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan in 1985. Gotti family associate John Carneglia was suspected in that crime. I mean, he just got out of prison last summer, and so did reputed Gambino boss Gene Gotti, who served 29 years on a heroin conviction, taking over for his brother John Gotti, who died of cancer in prison. So police are still looking for the gunman and that blue truck he was driving, Harris, and there are concerns that this murder could spark some kind of all-out mafia gang war right here in New York City.
That's what I've been reading about, and it is like a movie, as you said. Rick Leventhal, thank you very much.
Sure.
The top Republican in the Senate is planning a vote that would hold Democrats, push them to make their position known on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal. Drama.
In for Dana Perino. Big show today as we await the president's first ever veto, all about border security. Plus new details on that horrific mass killing in New Zealand. We'll talk to the American ambassador stationed there. And Democrats having a bit of a difficult time explaining what exactly Beto O'Rourke's most important accomplishments are. We'll keep on looking with our political panel right here on the Daily Briefing.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell plans to hold a procedural vote later this month on the Green New Deal. Then he'll advance it potentially to a full vote to force Senate Democrats to show where they stand on that controversial measure, which is co-sponsored by New York Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Our Peter Ducey caught up with her yesterday.
I look forward to us having a real vote and not just a procedural vote. Thank you.
And what do you think it's going to take to convince Mitch McConnell to act different?
I don't know. I wish that he would also prioritize H.R. 1, which actually reinstates voting rights and helps get money out of politics. But he doesn't seem to be interested in improving our democracy. He seems more interested in running procedural votes.
Let's bring in now the power panel. Capri Cafaro, former Democratic member of the Ohio State Senate and executive in residence in the School of Public Affairs at American University. Chris Wilson, former Ted Cruz campaign pollster, GOP pollster, and a CEO of WPA Intelligence. Chris, I'm going to start with you. As I said last hour on Outnumbered, I likened it to basketball. This is somewhat of a baller move by Senator McConnell. I mean, he is putting Democrats on the spot. What will they do?
He really is, and Ocasio-Cortez has learned an important lesson of the policy process. You just can't throw out any sort of crazy idea without there being consequences. And what McConnell's doing here is he's forcing every Democrat, and it seems like almost every Democrat senator is either running for president or thinking about running for president. He's putting them all on the record as to whether or not they support socialist policies or whether they have to take a stand against their progressive base. And the important aspect of this, when I mentioned the running for president part of it, is because when you look at 2020, this has important consequences in some states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, because the vote on what the Green New Deal would do is essentially destroy the steel industry, destroy the auto industry, destroy the coal industry. And those states that Democrats have to win back, that Obama won but Trump won, it's going to put them into play with a vote like this, and I think it really puts Democrats in a bind.
Well, and it's interesting, too, Capri, he's talking about 14 pages of somewhat of an outline, as I've read it. So maybe giving it a bit more credit now, but when you put it before Democrat senators, what do they do?
Well, I think that's what's really going to be interesting is not to see who votes for it, but if there's anyone that actually votes against it. People like Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota have said things like, you know, we need to have a more incremental approach, for example. Sherrod Brown, who now is not running for president, but he has said something similar to that. So I think that it is going to be interesting to see who actually votes for it and who votes against it. This is nothing new. I mean, I can tell you from at least the state level that we would do these kind of resolution type of votes all the time to get people on the record from a political purpose. For example, when we knew people were running for Congress, we would do resolutions supporting or
so you played this
opposing.
game before.
I certainly. Well, I have not made it happen, but I've been there for it.
That's
with a front row
transparent.
seat.
Real quickly, just to double down with you. So if you get on the record and you vote what I call present, does that count?
Me? No. I mean, look, we weren't allowed to do that at the state level in Ohio, but present is a total cop-out. I think that, you know, and frankly, I think that the fact is if somebody does vote present, it means that they probably would vote yes, but they're afraid of the potential fallout, in my opinion. We also have to remember that the AFL-CIO, the major labor unions, there's a number of unions that are critical of the Green New Deal, and that could have an impact as well on who may support in labor.
Chris, jump back in.
Well, that's the most important point. I think what you just said about the unions. I mean, what this does is the Green New Deal has the potential to break the cracks that are already forming and exist in the Democrat coalition. If you start to see organized labor bailing out the Democratic Party and following along with what happened last cycle, which was blue collar labor, they're not. How do they stand with these urban socialist Democrats that really want to destroy their jobs, destroy their industry altogether? And I think what Ocasio-Cortez has done here, and what the vote that it's forcing, or the position it forces Democrats to take, really has the potential to bring about a complete realignment of the Democratic Party.
Well, it's fascinating. Ocasio-Cortez, of course, makes a good point. It's a non-binding resolution. I doubled down with you, Capri. I'll do the same with you, Chris. Your last thoughts.
Well, in terms of it being a non-binding, no one in the voting public sees it that way. The way Capri explained it is she gets that, but most people don't because they haven't been in elected office. They're going to see the vote. They're going to see they know what the Green New Deal is in theory, and they're going to know whether